movement. Earlier, Milwaukee had spent a good 5 minutes pondering his next move at the bottom of the lake, tucked away in a bubble of air. It wasn't all that draining to maintain, especially when one considered he needed only to cover his head and replenish the oxygen every few seconds. He knew fairly well his teammates were fatiguing Singap above, and despite all his eagerness, he was loath to join them. So, here he had sat, trying to figure out just how he was going to beat Sensei and get that Thricidum bell. Admittedly, those options were limited. Naruto had hit dangerously close to the mark when he'd claimed the boy had no jutsu to call his own. Close, but not quite. He did have one technique that he'd been saving for a special occasion. It wasn't all that fast, but it was powerful. And draining. A single use could leave him almost entirely exhausted. But if it worked, Sensei wouldn't be in any position to fend him off. Not to mention he was one of only 2 shinobi who had the potential to do it. Darn it, he'd really wanted to surprise everyone, too. Steeling himself, he extended his senses, reaching out to every tree in the grounds. He felt their life force like a warm ray of sunshine, even here at the bottom of the lake. Still further he stretched his senses, even going so far as to pop a soldier pill and cease breathing within his tiny bubble of air. He had to concentrate, he would need every fiber of his focus if this were to work. The slightest break in concentration could prove disastrous. Brow steepling in concentration, he clasped his fingers together. Mokuton. Mokuton. Naruto whirled as the trees of the field came alive before his very eyes, roots rapidly erupting beneath his feet, snarling around his right arm before he'd even had a chance to react. Would release what the hell. He felt the roots tugging down on his arm with incredible strength, and it actually required some of his own to resist. The timing couldn't have been worse. No sooner was he bound than Kushina and Ibiki chose that moment to gang up on him, not individually as one might expect, but in tandem. Milwaukee, you marvelous bastard. Aren't I awesome? Naruto didn't see the boy emerge from the tree line, didn't even realize the genin had stepped straight out a tree itself. He was too busy trying not to laugh out of the irony of it all. Kushina looked like she was about to bounce out of sheer glee. Wait a sec, what was that emerging from her back, boy? The latter completely baffled him with the emergence of her chakra chains, something he had never seen or known to have existed. Those deadly barbs were as fleet as they were agile, holding his free hand fast, her golden tethers binding the limb back before he could act, and that was before Ibiki summoned forth those wires from God knew where, effectively binding him in place against the 3 with a violent tug. Naruto almost smiled at the audacity of such an attack. He'd been pinned once before in his youth with this very move, he had a feeling he knew what was coming next. Yami was less tactful when faced with the sudden reversal. Cheeky little. For a very long moment, Naruto simply smiles within his powerful prison of chains and wood and wires. He'd known all along that Tsunade and Milwaukee were the grandchildren of the first Hokage. Hell, everyone knew that. But never had he dared to dream of the boy to awaken his blood in the midst of a battle. Or had he achieved this power even before then? Regardless, it was a milestone. Not nearly enough to hold him for more than a few seconds, but still, for a genin to unlock his bloodline. And despite his expectations, the Kidshus kids had managed to bind him. God, it was almost enough to make him proud. Aryuuka no Jutsu. Those thoughts fell apart as Ibiki opened his mouth and exhaled, expelling a familiar dragon of flame. Naruto blanched, it was much larger than the one Sasuke had spat at him. Oi oi oi. Isn't it a little excessive holding back or not, that could really hurt him. His armed arm bristled, muscles bulging as he used his full strength to tear it free. He flung it up before his face. Akram. The ensuing explosion was nothing short of spectacular, blinding his genin to the chaos they'd inadvertently wrought. When the smoke finally cleared they could see the Uchiha was utterly unharmed, having torn himself free from Milwaukee's bonds and raised the war fan before his face to shield himself from the blow. Wait. How was that possible? Madara's or not, the fan was made of paper and metal, there was just no way it could have withstood Ibiki's inferno. That wasn't bad. Naruto grunted, levering himself up once more. But even with your teamwork, you still couldn't make me move. Now it's my turn. Naruto closed his eyes and dug deep within himself, opening all his chakra points and releasing them as one. The result was as violent as it was immediate, a simple flex of muscles and his unnatural bonds quite brilliantly shattered, spraying energy in either direction. Battered by its abrupt release, the kids never saw him raise his warfan until it was too late. Uchiha reflection. Scarce had he spoken than the wicked weapon flared a fiery red and, true to its name, released the absorbed firestorm, hurling the contained inferno back to greet them the 3 teens within all its fury. Kushina had just enough time to gasp before the explosion hit, before Naruto realized he had inadvertently returned the technique with its full power still, lacking true control over the fan therapy, flinging a very dangerous and extremely powerful jutsu at his students without thinking. Shit. He started forward into the smoke with an angry hiss, peering with his Sharingan, idly fearing the worst as it began to clear. Hey. A rough voice greeted him. That hurt. Uchiha froze. Kurama slitted her eyes and stared back at him from within Kushina's visage, her lips pulled in a wide feral grin. A single hand had been flung forwards to guard against a returning attack, and it had done so quite spectacularly in her own right, shielding her teammates on either side. Naruto braced himself for an attack, but he needn't have bothered, even, as he looked on, Kushina actually laughed, her no-crimson orbs dancing brightly. She pointed at the line. Sure Eno's foot had crossed it, his sandal toes well over the barrier he'd created. You lose, sensei. There was a silence as those words sank in. A crackle of thunder split the air. Well, shit. He murmured, scratching the back of his head. They'd gotten him. Fair and square. You guys. Pass. That lone word met with a flurry of movement from his team. Kushina screamed at the top of her lungs. Nawaki was left muttering unintelligible words. Ibiki blew a smoke ring and passed out. What? Just like that. The Uchiha painted a soft smile across his face. You already know the answer. Teamwork. Kushina's voice was surprisingly hoarse when she finally found it. You wanted us to work together. Give the lovely lady a prize. Really, he shouldn't have been surprised by what came next. I want ramen. So it was that Naruto found his hard-earned payment from his first mission spiraling into the bottomless pit that was Kushina's stomach. Ibiki and Nawaki had each enjoyed a single bowl, and he himself a few more, but the Redeed was well past her sixth and still going. Well, at least he didn't have to wonder where he'd gotten his fixation from. Still, how could one 16-year-old girl eat that much? In the time it had taken him to try and think even that much, she'd already moved on to her eighth, make that her ninth. Does all that ramen go straight to her chest or something? It'd certainly explain the breasts. Yasha. You're finally starting to see things my way, partner. I'm not even gonna argue that. Quite the eater, isn't she? Someone said from off to the side. You can say that again, Naruto muttered, turning his head toward the voice, an easy smile leaping to his face without thinking. She really is one hell of a. Then he saw who had spoken. Every fiber in his body froze, black eyes threatening to try and bulge clear out of his head if he didn't do something to control them. Kakashi-sensei? No. Wait. This wasn't Kakashi. Now that he looked, Naruto was able to calm himself. Yes, the resemblance was there, but upon closer inspection, this fellow was certainly not him. For starters, there was no mask, the jaw was square, both eyes were black, and his white hair was bound back in a ponytail, oddly reminiscent of the one Jiraiya wore. Furthermore, he wore a white sleeve on the right and a tanto strapped to his back, likely the cause of a certain epithet which escaped the former blonde at the moment. Kakashi had none of those things. No, this man was undoubtedly Haddock Tsukumo. Part of him wanted to dance when meeting Kakashi's father, but he stubbornly suppressed it. He couldn't be prone to such flights of fancy anymore. Not if he intended to save the future. Rolling his shoulders, he willed himself to relax. Be at ease. Calm. Cool. Confidence. Steeling himself, he looked the man dead in the eye. I don't believe we've met, Naruto said, slapping on his best poker face. Another thing this body was good for and extending a hand. I'm Uchiha Naruto. Pleased to make your acquaintance. Tsukumo didn't shake. I've heard of you. Was all he would say. Frowning, Naruto lowered his hand. Fine. He was going to be like that then. So, what brings you here? I just thought I'd stop to congratulate Kushina on her new team. Tsukumo said with a smile, as a feeling of death hovered in the air between the two of them. That and I wanted to meet the man who saved me the hassle of going down to the border. A little birdie told me he'd been promoted and would be leading a team into a megacur later this evening. Surprise, surprise. My little girl just so happens to be on it. Naruto did not flinch at the slight, but inwardly, he quailed. Guh. The man was treating him like he was asking Tsukumo for Kushina's hand or something. Gathering his courage, Naruto willed himself to look the older man square in the eye, refusing to flinch. She has nothing to fear from me. Then he paused, considering the man's words about the rain. I won't let any harm come to her, either. A few seats down, Kushina pricked up, ears twitching. Yes, so I've been told. She seems quite fond of you. Tsukumo's smile didn't slacken in the slightest, but there was just a note of tension in his voice. Obviously he didn't trust him. Just so you know, she's the closest thing I have to a daughter, not discounting my son. Now, I've seen how you've made your way around this village, you've got the eye of almost every kunoichi on you. Probably even betted a few. So from one man to another, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and warn you before you go and do anything stupid like that with Kushina. Hi. Naruto felt himself frown, not liking where this was going. Not at all. I'm afraid I don't follow you. Then allow me to spell it out for you. When next he spoke his eyes were like glacial ice, cold, callous, promising a world of pain. You break her heart and I break you. Naruto blanched at the man. You heard me, Uchiha. Once again that aura of dread appeared around him, the very air thick with malicious intent as the area around the whitehead seemed to darken, as if there was a small solar eclipse happening just around Tsukumo and nowhere else. Then it happened. Even Naruto could not suppress a small shudder when it appeared, a mask, the kind used in Japanese no theater to represent a jealous demon or serpent. It crawled out from behind the man's deceptively slight frame, a mask of hatred that seemed to pierce your very soul. The fact that he had a pleasant smile on his face just made the look that much more creepy. You would do well to take good care of her. Understood? Yikes. This man made Orochimaru look tame. Ahahaha. I'll remember that. Good. The whitehead smiled and just like that, the aura of menace was gone. See that you do, and we won't have any problems. He slapped a hefty note down onto the countertop. Here. That ought to pay for whatever she eats. It'd be such a shame if you weren't able to make your rent this month, Tsukumo. The man never got to finish that sentence as a furious Kushina thrust herself between them, her eyes ablaze, every strand of her lustrous hair standing on end. Despite the ire not being directed at him, Naruto cringed off to the side out of pure awe. She'd really earned the title of Bloody Habanero. Tsukumo on the other hand, didn't bat so much as an eyelash when faced with the woman's wrath. He stood tall and stern beneath the crashing waves of her anger, an immutable rock for her fury to break upon. I told you not to threaten him. She admonished, berating the larger man with a finger. You're going to scare him off. Someone has to keep an eye on your chastity. The man replied, utterly unfazed. You're only 16, Kushina. That's too young to restart your clan. A tick mark formed on the Uzumaki's forehead. I mean. That's not of your business, Tebane. Would you be willing to share him, then? What? The fire in the Ritide's eyes sputtered and died as though he'd dropped a bucket of water on her head. For a heartbeat, just a heartbeat, Naruto felt her gaze swivel to him, those violet orbs brimming with more questions than he was willing to answer. Ibiki and Nawaki were making a point not to look at him, doing their best to stay out of it as Kushina pinned him with her gaze. In Hinsataltho the sinister silence seemed to stretch onto eternity, it lasted all of an instant. Why the hell would I care about that? Naruto facepalmed so hard he fractured the counter. Tsukumo blinked, thunderstruck. At last, both men seemed to recover their composure. Well, it's your decision. Tsukumo smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes, not as he turned his gaze upon Naruto. But remember what I said, Ichigo. The ex-blind watched Kakashi's father depart with relief, quietly shivering at his passage. Scary. So? Makoto got to you first, didn't she? It was not a question. She knew. Someone she'd managed to figure it out just from Tsukumo's simple hint. He'd underestimated her. I was wondering why she was so cheery, what with Fugaku being in a coma, but damn, that's sneaky. I'll have to get her back for that, among others. The words slipped out before he could think to stop them. Yet he felt nothing but relief. Tsukumo had been right in that regard. He needed to be honest with her. The last thing he wanted to do was take her heart and shatter it into 1,000 pieces. Others. He sighed, regretting it already. Yeah, it's kind of a long story. Tell me. Oi, it's my life we're talking about here. He fixed her with his best Uchiha glower. I don't see why I'm inclined to tell you any. Kushina didn't falter, not in the slightest. Stay. Although she might not be his mother in this day and age, Naruto's resolve was no match for the determined Uzumaki. Within minutes, she knew of Pakura and Kurara, and while he went to great pangs to exempt what he believed would be too much for her to bear, he had the sinking suspicion the young Uzumaki knew exactly what had transpired between him and the three Kunoichi. There was no anger from her. No tears. No shouts or swears or even screams on her part. Just silence. She simply sat there and just stared at him, her violet eyes boring holes into his forehead. It was like being faced with a completely different person. Naruto didn't think he could handle something like that. Look, I'm sorry if I upset you or anything. He said at last, shattering the impasse between them. But I'm not exactly the poster boy for good behavior around these parts. You should find someone nice, someone like that Minato kid. I mean, he's your age and all. Sorry. Eh? Looking, he never did get to finish that sentence. I said, sorry. Abruptly, Kushina dropped out of her seat, red hair twirling from the motion. Her lips were suddenly brushing his cheek, her words softer than satin. But you're not getting rid of me that easily, sensei. A shiver of surprise shot down his spine. If I've got competition, then I'll just have to try harder. Naruto jerked back, baffled. Where the hell had that come from? What? Kushina flushed, her earlier boldness vanishing with a stray autumn breeze. I am not saying it again, besides, her face crinkled in a confused frown, why would I be interested in Minato? He's been acting weird, lately. Pretty sure he has a crush on you. Really? She blinked, baffled by his words. I've hardly spoken so much as 2 words to him, and even when I do, he's always shooing me away so he can train or something. Why would I be interested in someone like that? Naruto opened up his mouth to protest otherwise. And snapped it shut. Ah. It made sense now. Because Minato hadn't been the one to save Kushina, she'd never noticed him. Oh no, her radar was fixated firmly upon him, the Uchiha who'd not only rescued and mentored her, but was now her teacher. Minato was little more than a speck in her heart now. Score. The father is officially out of the way. Now, move in for the kill. Kushina, look, can we not talk about this now? She pleaded, flushing under his penetrating gaze. I mean what I said, but she suddenly squirmed, hands writhing like snakes in her lap. It's embarrassing, I mean I were my sensei now, and you probably think I'm all weird for liking you when you've got everyone interested in you. You're right. Naruto was suddenly aware that half the restaurant seemed to be staring at the two of them. Let's just enjoy our ramen. Oh, thank Kami. She promptly returned to stuffing her face with ramen before he could press her for details. Naruto, relieved for the change of subject, focused on his own meal. This was it then. He was doomed. He'd laid out each and every card for her, given her every chance to fold, to turn back. And she hadn't. She was still here. Being troublesome. Making things difficult. Did he mention troublesome things? Ibiki and Milwaukee were wise enough to keep their mouths shut, stay silent, and enjoy their free meal. Good thing, too. Naruto was in the mood to inflict 8,000 years of pain on someone, even his students. Well, that'd be a first. A hoarse voice chuckled at him. This time, Naruto turned his head slowly, not wanting to be caught by surprise. But it was a young Tucci he laid eyes on. No surprise there. Am hadn't been born yet. Still reeling from Sakumo's implied threats, he didn't have much stomach for nostalgia. The man's next words made it even less so. You're the first man Sakumo hasn't scared away. He said. I've never seen her stick up for anyone like that before. She must really like you. He does this kind of thing often. But of course. The man chuckled. Kushina-chan is our favorite customer. Sakumo's always treating her to ramen. I'm honestly surprised Hokage didn't make him her new teacher after Karo died. Naruto shot a withering glare at the man's retreating back suddenly, understanding just why Sakumo had tried to scare the crap out of him. Still, who was this Karo fellow? Had he been Kushina's old sensei? Sarutobi had suggested that Kushina was once already part of a team. But he'd mentioned no names. So many questions. He stole a glance at his student, suddenly feeling intensely protective. I won't let anything happen to her. Yami pounced before he could take the words back. Well said. And if anything should happen between you two, all's fair in love and war, right? Why do I put up with you again? Because if you got rid of me, you'd have no one left to argue with. Point taken. Naruto shook his head in mild exasperations, ignoring the chuckle of the older man as he raised his gaze to the roof of his favorite establishment. It really was nostalgic, treating his students to ramen like this. Even if one of them was his matter of fact, he seemed to find himself forgetting more and more often as of late. It was becoming something of a problem. His mom thought she might someday be. It was becoming increasingly difficult to reconcile this young woman with a woman he barely even knew. As much as it might gall him to admit it. He was attracted to her. He was a young man after all, and she was a young woman. It certainly did not help that his heart was already tangled up with 3 women. He cared about them. And now he was starting to care about her. Why? That was the only thing he could ask himself. Why now? And why her? It was not Kushina's fault, and he didn't blame the girl, well, not completely. Had Kushina never arrived, he would have never started feeling this way. But it wasn't like she had intended for this to happen, it wasn't like Kushina even knew what was really happening. That still didn't change his question. Why? It was almost as if a loud crash, punctuated by a very female shriek, ended that thought before it could bloom. Why are you always staring at my chest? Here we go again. Kushina muttered around a mouthful of ramen. The blonde's head whipped around hard enough to give his neck whiplash. His ears pricked up, his head turning towards the voice. It hadn't been Kushina, she was far too absorbed in her ramen to notice his wandering eye. No, that voice hadn't been hers. Still it was oddly familiar. It almost sounded like. But that was impossible. Intrigued, he trained his attention on the 2 voices. Almost unbidden, Naruto found his attention drawn off Kushina and into the spectacle. Some unfamily was shouting, stuttering yes, but still clearly incensed by her comrade's actions. Asha-sama, I didn't mean to. Then stop staring, Hiashi. I was merely using my Byakugan to ensure that you weren't under any duress. You were staring. Smack. A resounding gasp put an end to those words in the same instant that Naruto dislodged himself from his stool, sandaled feet touching the ground in the same instant that his body came careening through the blinds to put an end to the conflict. He barely heard Kushina's muffled cry of "Sensei, don't." At his back, but too late, his body was already in motion, his fingers wrapping firmly around the young man's wrist before he could so much as bat an eyelash, wrenching his arm up and out of harm's way. I think you should leave the lady alone, friend. He rumbled, Mangekyou flaring for emphasis. Don't you? Subsequent silence was deafening. Yeah. Pretty sure you just made the kid piss his pants. Alright, he admitted to himself, maybe we should have used more tact. We? What's this we business partner? Imagine his surprise when he found himself face to face with a young Hyuga Hiyashi. Impossible not to recognize that damned face bickering with a young woman who could have been Hinata's biological twin, were it but for two things, the short bob of her abundant dark blue hair and a pale crescent shaped skirt taking up residence on her right cheek. The injury looked fairly recent to his eyes, it had the look of a wound that had only recently been tended to, possibly yesterday even. She stared at him in surprise, her mouth opened in a small round O of confusion, not expecting a stranger to come to her aid. Pardon me, she tripped over the word, but who are you? Ah, sorry about this. Naruto gently relaxed the iron vice that his grip, allowing Hiyashi to wrench his arm free not a moment afterward. The name's Naruto. I'm still rather new to the village and well. I couldn't help but overhear your little squabble. Sharingan eyes swiveled upon Hiyashi with an almost frigid disparity, causing the younger man to flinch. This guy bothering you? He was just leaving, actually. Hinata's mother was damned certain this was hers, mulled sweetly, stammering ever so slightly. Isn't that right, Hiyashi? Ashaham, I must insist. Hiyashi leveled an angry glare at Naruto. This. Ichiha, he cannot be trusted. Noted. Those lavender eyes were like chips of diamond, harsh and unflinching. You're dismissed, Hiyashi. As you wish. Shamefaced by her curt dismissal, the young man whirled and stalked away down the street. Naruto fought the urge to stick out his tongue at the shinobi's retreating back. What an asshole. He might have mellowed out in more recent years, but a young Hiyashi was still every bit of the prick he remembered from his youth. Still, Hashi has surprised him with her sternness. Where had that stuttering girl gone? The moment he had stepped in, she seemed more confident, more. Everything. Hot damn. Yami whistled wolfishly. Like a mother, like a daughter. She's got a spine of steel when she wants to. Naruto resolutely ignored the wily words his darker hawk was whispering. You gonna be alright, he asked her. Eyes? The young woman bowed, her head inclining in a jerky bob. Thank you for your assistance in this matter, Ichiha-sama. Ma, we're both Konoha shinobi here. He raised a hand to scratch at the back of his head, slightly flustered by the formality. Just call me Naruto. You're that one, aren't you? Pardon? The Black Death. That seems to be my moniker of late, yes. Omen. It's just. You're taller than I thought you would be. Handsome, too. Ah. She squeaked, her face flaring a fire engine red. I need to go. Good luck, Hashi-san. Kushina enthused shortly at her retreating comrade, then returned to her feast. Naruto let her go and reluctantly returned to the stand himself, claiming a stole beside his student. So was that. Oh, her? The retreat blinked. That's Hashi. She's about a year older than me, daughter of some main branch Hyuga. Some say she's next in line. You know, to take over. Right up there with Hiyashi team. Not very confident though, so she probably won't be the successor. It's sad. An almost resigned note entered her voice, those violet eyes hardening, just a fraction before she continued devouring her food. We used to play together when we were little. She's a good person, we used to play together when we were little. Still is. I'd hate to see her get branded with that god-awful seal. Naruto quietly gawped. But she looks just like. Shaking himself, he returned his attention to Kushina. Why would they do that? You said so yourself, she's from the main branch. Irideed fixed him with a pointed look. You really don't know much about this village, do ya? Naruto shook his head. She told me, once. Her family doesn't like the way she does things. Too forward-thinking. If she became the clan head, they probably wouldn't put that thing on her. But if she doesn't. She sucked down a mouthful of noodles, gulped and frowned, losing herself in the broth. That's how the village is nowadays. If you're different they either bully you or find some way to silence you. Those words ended in a tiny cry of flustered surprise as he reached down and tousled her hair, inadvertently pushing her initiate down over her eyes. Give me a list of names and I'll pay them a visit for you, I won't let anyone badmouth a student of mine. She smiled then, and it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. You're nice, sensei. Maybe, but you've definitely got me beat when it comes to ramen. Hahaha, Kushina surprised him with a very sinister chuckle. That's right, no one can beat me. Beating? Naruto suddenly thought back to the mark on Hashi's cheek and the way she'd held her arm to her chest. Those wounds. Had they been inflicted by Jayukin? If so then that would mean. Christ. I better not regret this. I just remembered something, he lied. I need to purchase more kunai before we leave. Suit yourself. Kushina laughed, snatching his bowl up. More for me. God, she ate like she hadn't been fed in days or something. Another item Naruto resolved to rectify. Ramen was all well and good, but she needed to balance out her diet. Actually, he continued, sitting back down, I think I'll wait. Okay. She blinked at him, confused. Subtly swapping himself with a shadow clone, and with his team none the wiser, Naruto followed after the Hyuga. He wasn't quite sure what had caused him to do it, it might have been her frightening resemblance to Hinata, or because he just felt sorry for the poor girl. Nobody deserved to get ogled like that. Nobody deserved that god-awful seal. She wasn't all that hard to find, she stuck out in her kimono like a sore thumb. Even so, he almost slammed right into her back when she spun around. "Naruto-san." She stammered out, her cheeks dusted the lightest shade of pink. "Is there something else you wanted?" "Actually," Naruto kindly returned the bow. "There was something. How did you get those wounds?" Ashi went pale and subconsciously tucked her injured arm closer to herself. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I think you do." "No, I don't." Naruto frowned, eyes crinkling at the edges in quiet contemplation. Once, he would have accepted her words. But after the world of brutality he'd lived through in the Fourth Shinobi War, he wasn't about to let something like that slide. Without thinking he reached out and took her arm. Hashi whimpered in pain, cringing aside as he rolled up her sleeve. That was when he saw the bruises. Whomever had done this hadn't struck to inflict pain on their opponent. They'd been trying to torment her, blocking the chakra points, just so to inflict the maximum amount of hurt as the Jayukin wore off. His Sharingan detected subtle traces of Hiashi's chakras tied down in her coils where she'd been struck. One look at her body language told him the Hyuga was in active discomfort just by walking. This was not vicious. "Did he do this to you?" His voice was hard to find in that instant, and she colored, her pale cheeks flushing a rosy red. "No," Naruto thought to himself. No more denials. "I don't like liars, Hashi-san." The poor Hyuga wilted beneath his gaze. Hiashi was just expressing concern over my injuries. Her tone told him she very much doubted that was the case. Naruto had seen the look in his eye. He'd been ogling her, fawning over her like a piece of meat. If he had been the one to inflict these wounds and then the gall ask about them, he would. "Do what?" Yami challenged him. "What are you going to do to a member of the Hyuga clan? Beat him? Kill him? Without suffering repercussions? I'm not that foolish." "Shut up. Holy shit, you're actually pissed about this, aren't you? I don't believe it. I mean, you always did have a soft spot for the Hyuga, but damn no. I'm about to get a whole lot angrier if you don't cork it." Naruto couldn't help himself, he was reminded of a certain Hyuga during the Chunin preliminaries, the beating she had suffered at the hands of her cousin. The only difference here was that the argument was between two members of the main household and it smacked of brutality. He didn't like it. Not one bit. Thinking softly, he began to open her with his own chakra in a slow series of pokes, ignoring her quiet cries of surprise as he effortlessly reversed the damage that had been done to her. "Aitai." She yelped when a particularly painful point reopened, her cry drawing attention from passerby. Finishing up with her, he healed the fractures in her arms, as well as mending them with medicinal chakra in such swift succession that Tsunade herself would have been hard-pressed to match him. He deliberately left a trace of his own energy to linger there in a warning, something like that would be readily seen by anyone possessing the Byakugan. None would understand it. Save for Hiashi. The Nine or Node would know what Naruto had done the moment laid eyes on Hashi, hopefully he would understand the silent threat. "Hurt her one more time and you'll never be able to use Jayukin again." "Oh, did you do that?" Hashi blinked, eyeing the now flawless skin of her limb. The bruises. They were gone. As though they'd never been. "You learn a lot of things when you're on your own," he replied, a low growl snaking between his teeth as Hiashi's brutality flickered through his mind. "Still. This is unacceptable. He's part of your clan. Families shouldn't do this to each other. I've half a mind to." "No. Don't. I appreciate all you've done for me." Hashi gushed, performing another perfunctory bow. "Really. I do. We barely know each other." She risked another glance at her arm, "And you didn't have to do that, but you did, for which I thank you." Besides, at Naruto's ire, she hastily continued. "You're being groomed to be the Uchiha's heir, aren't you?" There it was again, that damnable rumor that he was going to take over the Uchiha clan, now more fact than fiction. And for once, he couldn't bring himself to deny it. "Too don't want you to sully your reputation on my behalf. But, if I can take up just another moment of your time." Without thinking, his hand closed around hers. Looking back, he wasn't sure what spurred the action, perhaps it was pity. Perhaps he knew what it was like to be bullied and have no one to care about. Whatever the case, he did not fail to notice her fierce flush the moment his rugged hands met her soft palms. "I've all the time in the world." She was silent for a very long time after that. When she finally spoke, her voice was the most naked whisper. "What do you think I should do?" Taking a deep breath, the Uzumaki in disguise calmed himself. He needed to be rational here. No matter how much he wished to push past her and storm into the Hyuga compound, then kick Hiashi's ass from one end of Konoha to the other. Rational, right. Calm. Well, the way I see it, it's your heart. You have to make the decision for yourself. Naruto frowned, thumbing his chin, drawing upon the lazy yet effective wisdom of an old friend. Besides, guys like that tend to swing one way or another. Either he's bothering you because he really likes you and he's sorry for what he did, which I seriously doubt. Or, he's just a pervert that you need to smack down before he gets the wrong idea. And if he's hurting you out of pure spite. You can't ignore that. I see. She nodded, faltering on the last word. Are you like that as well, Ichihakin? It took him all of 3 seconds to realize the cun in there, then, and that she'd spoken of the former tense, not the latter. Oh dear Kami. Naruto jolted. Who? Me? Oh, no. No, no, no. He swiftly flung up his hands, old memories of Sakura and Tsunade rushing to the fore. I try to look at the eyes first, you know. Get to know someone first, may take him out on a date or two before I even think of staring. I've been clobbered too many times when I was little to gawp at someone's chest now. It's rude, you know. Ah. She stared at him for a long moment after that, contemplating. The smile when it came brightened her visage so much like her namesake. Father was wrong about you. He was. Naruto cocked his head aside, confused at the less than honorable mention. He'd never met Hinata's grandfather in his lifetime, there was virtually nothing for him to fall back on, let alone draw into this little conversation he'd accidentally st con who was Hashi's father. What was he like? Technically being her father made him both Hinata and Hanabi's grandfather, yet knowing that did absolutely nothing to aid him in their situation. In the end, he settled for a shrug. Well, I suppose I should be flattered. Hi. She nodded. He said you were just like the others. But you're not. You're kinder than your clansmen. Yeah, I'm Mr. Congeniality. That got a slight smile again. I have enjoyed this talk. She said at last, stealing a glance over her shoulder to the Hyuga compound, looking a sore sight better than she'd been when they'd first met. Perhaps we could do it again, sometime. She hid her healed arm behind her back shyly, a silent reminder of the kindness he had done to her. He was reminded so much of Hinata in that instant back for she'd taken that knife and the RRR. Shaking himself of that dreadful image, the Uchiha once more painted a soft smile on his face to address the possible heiress. Sure. We'll make a date for it when I get back from my mission. He'd meant it as a joke, but the way her eyes lit up. The eyes? She stuttered out. I would like that. Ah, very much. You're off to Rain, aren't you? Then, here, at his hesitant nod, she reached around her neck and unbound the necklace she'd been wearing. At least, he thought of it as a necklace. It wasn't until she removed it that he recognized the yin-yang symbol reminiscent of the Hyuga clan, bound in a small leather token as a twir. A charm. Naruto blinked as she pushed it into his hands not an instant later, its leather cord pooling neatly into palm. For good luck. Another bow, another smile that made his heart skip a beat. Take care. Naruto-kun. Naruto felt his throat run dry as he watched her retreat into the safety of the Hyuga compound. Did I just encourage Hinata's mom? Oh, snap. Groaning, the Uchiha performed an about-face and started back the way he'd come, Yami leaving him to stew in his own bleak thoughts. Something was definitely at work here. What in the 9 circles of hell was going on? He seemed to be befriending or outright betting the mothers of his generation. Or having them crush on him, in Kushina's case. First her and Mikoto, then Pakura, now he'd just befriended Hinata's mom on top of it. Honestly, if it weren't for Pakura, he'd think there was some kind of pattern at work here. Maybe there was. He didn't know. Truly he cared for these girls, each of them, so why did he feel so damn guilty about the possibility of fathering most of his old friends? Maybe you should stop looking a gift horse in the mouth and just run with it, partner. Trust me, you'd be a lot happier that way. You might be right. He thought to himself. Fuck it. I'm not even going to bother worrying about this shit anymore. What happens, happens. He was growing weary of burdening himself with the wadis of this time, a problem he didn't need when he already had the fate of a world riding on his shoulders. Now that's more like it. Welcome to the dark side, my son. Yeah, well don't get used to me agreeing with you, jackass. He was just about to substitute himself with the clone he'd left back at Ichiraku when his hand closed upon his shoulder. Why the long face, man? Naruto's gaping mouth snapped shut with an audible click, a muscle jumping in his jaw. You know, I've had just about enough to be picked today. Whoa there, no need to get snappy. Boy. The reborn Uchiha spun around, intent on biting the intruder's head off right and proper, when he found himself face to face with none other than a young Shikaku Nara. Him, and a striking raven-haired woman at his elbow. Now, Naruto recognized the man's face almost immediately, though slightly less grizzled, and lacking the trademark scar he remembered. Ponytail and lazy demeanor were like a kunai to the face, impossible to miss and easy to recognize, especially in uniform. Odd, he kept running into familiar faces today. The woman on the other hand, man's girlfriend, perhaps now she was a mystery. Naruto felt as though he should know her somehow, but all he got from her was a lingering sense of nostalgia. Bah. Whomever she was. Troublesome. The woman's smile showed teeth, a voice varying from saccharine to poisonous emerged from those full lips. Those girls from the sand village were right. You really are kind. Hardworking, too. Nothing like Shikaku over here. Her smile seemed a touch more deadly as she turned her gaze upon him. You haven't taken a mission in like what, a week now? Hey, it's not my fault. Nara gave a jaw-popping yawn. The Hokages got me earmarked for some black op and Kiri once the fuss and aim dies down. Something about pulling some clans to the village. Naruto's right ear twitched at that remark, Onyx eyes shining with a rare intrigue. Now this was news. He'd already assumed that he would have to take matters with Kiri into his own hands, but the old monkey was actually giving it enough thought to assemble a team. And Shikaku was going to be on it. Wait, you're going to be on that mission, too? What, you actually know about that? Shikaku blinked, his perennial smile vanishing in an eye blink. Who told you? I was the one to suggest it. Kiri hasn't taken any action against us, yes, and with their Mizukage losing his mind, I thought now was as good a time as any to get some of their people to safety. Not to mention bring in a slew of powerful bloodline wielders in case things go south later in the war. But he didn't tell Shikaku that. No one needed to know that Naruto was angling to get the Yuki and Kagaya clans on their side. And possibly a certain strawberry blonde if she was around in this day and era. Bad. Bad Naruto. He had enough problems as it was without worrying about mate Terumi. Wherever she was, he was certain she could take care of herself. Maybe. Hopefully. Well shit, Nara frowned, dragging him back to reality. The Sandaime did mention that Uchiha would be leading the task force. Congratulations, I guess. Naruto felt the back of his neck color at the man's unexpected praise. Gee thanks, HMMPH. Someone snorted in the back of his head. How very like the weak to bow before the whims of the strong. Naruto froze, then relaxed. Very funny, asshole. Hey, that wasn't me. Yami piped up. What the fuck? Look, I've got Shikaku right in front of me here, I don't have time for your antics. I swear, I didn't do it. It was someone else. Hey. What? You sure we're not sharing this body with something else? Great. That's the last thing I need. Shaking off his dread, he came just in time to watch Shikaku getting berated by his Asafita-named woman. Is exactly what I'm talking about. She was saying. You need to take these things more seriously. That's why you need me on this. What the hell? He grouched. If Naruto wanted you on his mission he would have said so, troublesome woman. Well. I don't have any objections. See? Why can't you be more reasonable like him? Ouch, Shikaku muttered, though he seemed to take the insult with a grain of salt. To Naruto, it looked like he had gotten so used to his girlfriend making comments like this that he had gotten to the point where he simply shrugged the heavy words off. Such harsh words, Yashi, he whined. Do you really hate me that much, Yoshino? What was that, dear? Oi, what did I say this time? Shikaku's voice rose, his mask finally breaking as she took hold of his ear and yanked. Come on, Yoshino. That's not fair. Naruto. Help me out here. And you think I have a strange relationship, Naruto mumbled as he watched the byplay between the two. It was quite apparent that they had a long history together, even so they seemed to bicker like an old married couple, despite the fact that they were too young to even be engaged. The Uchiha sweat dropped, even he had seen that verbal gaffe there. Sorry, Yukinda walked into that one man. Traitor. Well, good luck to you. Yoshino smiled, tugging her teammate along against his will. Keep those kids alive, alright. I'm almost looking forward to that mission of yours now. Something in that stare of hers made a tiny part of him cower, she wouldn't take no for an answer. And he thought Tsukumo was scary. Yes ma'am. Naruto wouldn't realize it until he returned, but Yoshino Nara, the woman who would one day give birth to Shikamaru, had just flirted with him. Dear Kami. Yasha. Nawaki crowed, thrusting a fist into the air as they strode out of the gates and into the wide open world. This is it. My big debut. Look out world, here I come. Baka. Kushina snapped, tapping the brunette on the head. Save the exuberance for later. Naruto deadpanned, the expression oddly offset by Ibiki's quiet sigh. Some things never changed. They delayed long enough, departing at sunset rather than in afternoon, as their mandate dictated. But, he felt the rewards were worth it. For once, he now knew that his team weren't ranked in their mid to low chunin by their skill sets possessed some semblance of teamwork and could actually manage to work together when the need arose. It wasn't, but the group that set out from those gates was a sore sight better than the untested genin he'd first been saddled with. Besides, for what he had planned, leaving in the evening was ideal. Now, the land of rain is a dangerous place. He began, garnering their attention with a glance. I won't lie to you, many of the shinobi there are cold-blooded killers, they won't hesitate to end you if you give them the slightest opportunity. Thankfully, that's why I'm around. If we're able to meet up with Jiraiya and his group, we should be able to manage against Hanzo. The three of you will provide provisional support as needed but do not, and I repeat do not, engage Hanzo under any circumstance. He will waste you. Understand? Have you ever been there, sensei? No, I haven't, but if the third puts you three under me, he must have some idea of what he's doing. Hopefully. Wait, so we have to walk all the way there? The walkie whined. Who said anything about walking? Naruto replied, nipping the edge of his thumb and bringing it down upon the road. Fuchius no Jutsu. The dragons that arose out of the flames were smaller than Bahamut, but only marginally so. The first was a great green giant, its scales glinting brightly upon its limb form in the setting sun, golden eyes surveying the four of them with wide curiosity, instead of the dispassionate hunger with which the Prince of Dragons had regarded them before. But unlike the great black behemoth, this particular dragon inclined its head the moment it laid eyes upon Naruto, snout touching a portion of the road with a muffled snort. When it spoke, Kushina was startled to realize that it wasn't an it at all. It was a she. The second, a white lizard, was slimmer in appearance, his glacial wings all but dripping with condensation, its body more skeletal in comparison to its larger cousin. You called, Naruto Dono? Yo. Naruto grinned, patting her once on the head. Mind giving us a ride, Shuriken, Midorichan? I would be honored to carry you and your clutch upon my back into battle. HRMPH, the second huffed. I suppose I can do as such. Clutch. Nawaki tilted his head, confused as the Uchiha ushered Kushina onto its back. What's that? Ah, it's the way dragons refer to their family. Ibiki piped up before the latter could answer. What? Everything knows that. Behind him, Kushina flushed. Family? Eep. Those words ended in a startled squeak as Midori's wings beat the air and roared upwards, soaring into the air with a gracefulness that belied her bulk. She cried out and held tight to Naruto, wrapping her arms as well as the rest of her firmly against him, eliciting a flush from Uchiha and Uzumaki both. He could feel a certain something pressing into his back that he did not want to think about right now. Time for a distraction. One he had only to look down to achieve. Look. Kushina complied, what she saw there took her breath away. It was marvelous. The ground was simply gone, all that lay below them was miles of cloudy sky, the stars stretching for miles overhead. Serenity itself. There were no words that could possibly describe this moment for her, because her heart was utterly taken in this moment. It wasn't just a childhood crush, she realized. She was falling in love with him. Assuming she hadn't already. Everything he'd done, everything he certainly drew her despite her best efforts to resist his charms. She couldn't help it. He'd been so kind to her, from the moment they'd first met a month before, to now. And he didn't push her away like so many others. There was a gentleness in those charcoal eyes that made her feel safe. Warm. A slight flush rose to her cheeks. Naruto. The Uchiha sputtered as she edged up against him and, lacking the courage to risk anything more with Nawaki and Ibiki so close, delivered a swift peck to the back of his neck. The effect was as immediate as it was quite pleasant. Naruto nearly jumped up into the air, his cheeks coloring in surprise as he twisted to face her. Kushina. He admonished lightly. Gotcha. The young Uzumaki darted forwards in a rare moment of boldness and wriggled into his lap. Naruto froze, his body turning to stone beneath her. Perhaps he knew what was about to happen. Perhaps not, because in the next instant, before he could even form a coherent thought, Kushina's mouth caged him in a chaste lip-locking. It was a fleeting kiss, all things considered, little more than a brushing of the lips, but she'd done it. Her first kiss. She knew it was incredibly stupid of her to even dare such a thing now that he was her sensei, but it wasn't fair. She'd liked him long before Sarutobi had assigned her to him. In hindsight, that made his reaction all the more sweet. Ayu? What the heck? I'm not sorry, she stuck out her tongue with a giggle, worming around him and burying her head into his back when he tried to reach around and grab her. Eventually, he just gave up on it. You're not angry, are you? She asked at last, the words muffled into the fabric of his jacket. With me? No. His voice was oddly thick, rough even. I could never be angry with you. She could see that his knuckles were white, knotted together around Midori's scales. So? How do you feel? About? What do you think? I'm not sure how to feel. Kushina balked, but then she caught the corner of his mouth curling upward. He was smiling. Teasing her. Irate, she pecked him on the neck again. Naruto hissed. Stop that. Not until you look at Memph. His lips closed on hers in grill when he turned around, nearly knocking her clear out of the saddle, one hand cradling her hips, the other locking her face firmly in place. The kisses were hot and frantic and angry, and it took her breath away. It was over all too soon, his body jerking away from hers with a suddenness that left her mind spinning. Satisfied. Satisfied? How could she be satisfied after a scorching kiss like that? So? Just to reiterate, you don't hate me, right? She couldn't bear the thought of it. That much is clear. A soft sigh greeted her affections, but he made no move to pull away from her. A small part of her wished she could just stay like this forever, the two of them up here, Nawaki and Ibiki, little more than a distant memory on their own mount. Had she paid better attention, she might have noticed him touching a hand to his lips, almost in disbelief. Wonderment. If I kissed you again, what would you do? Still she daren't raise her head. Things. He relented at last, his dark gaze finally meeting her violet orbs again. Many, many things. Some of which would involve screwing your brains out. What? Despite that being the answer she wanted to hear, her face still colored at the way he'd said it. Sensei. You wanted honesty, didn't ya? He fell silent after that, and it was clear that they would discuss it no more this evening. How long can she stay like this? She wondered aloud, changing the subject. What? Naruto blinked, jerking his hand away from his mouth, shamefaced. A few hours, at least. Wow, that's awesome. Kushina wriggled free to stroke the scales of their mount. You're the best, mid-origin. Naruto blanched, both at the suffix knowing a dragon's pride and Kushina's nonchalant stroking of their airborne friend. Dragon scales could be quite sensitive. I wouldn't. Yes, that feels quite nice actually. Lower, if you please. Ah. Kushina grinned a megawatt smile, beaming as she stroked the summoned scales. She likes me. Indeed, a pleasured purr snaked out of Midori's closed mouth, her tail thrashing pleasantly as pleasant as such a beast could hope to be, her wings stretching time with the girl's firm scratching. You have a most willful student, Narita Dono. Midori rumbled in soft bemusement. I can see why she intrigued Behemoth-sama. Ha! Kushina gasped. You mean I was impressed by that big brute? Indeed, little one. That settled it. She had to sign the dragon contract. Naruto could only pray that aim wasn't as bad as he feared. It was worse. The land of rain was a warzone. Not only had they not been able to make contact with Tsunade and the others, but they didn't even know where the trio was, where they had gone, or if they were even alive. Rumors abound that they had fought with Hanzo of the Salamander and perished, others said that they had conquered him and claimed name for the leaf. Still others claimed that the Salamander had defeated them, bestowing upon the trio the title of Sannin for their courageous efforts. Naruto was inclined to believe the third, but none of that mattered now. Midori had been forced to land a ways back thanks to the conflict. Taking her into battle with so many jutsu flying simply wasn't an option. So here they were, in a land that seemed hellbent upon killing them. Bodies lay sprawled for miles on end, a handful of the maimed shinobi, but others bearing the battered initiative of the leaf. Ibiki remained unfazed, by comparison Nawaki looked sick to his stomach. My sister. Will be fine. Naruto soothed, patting the boy's back. She's too stubborn to die in a place like this. I hope so. Kushina gagged, quietly retching at the sight of so much death. Easy now, he soothed her, glancing at the water's edge. We're in enemy territory. But, look out. That was all he heard before the fireball hit. Sensei. Naruto's body had been blackened beyond recognition, not from the flames, but rather his technique. He'd hardened every inch of his body with the earth release in the nick of time, his form coated in a black veneer of hardened soil, even as they looked on it crumbled, revealing unharmed flesh beneath. Oten. Domu. The same could not be said of the 100 of AIM-9 that rose from the waters to meet him. He couldn't be bothered to remember their faces, their name was legion for they were many. Too many to count. Greetings, Ichigo and Naruto. One of them chuckled. We have been chosen by Hanzo-sama to entertain you this evening. Purred another. If you would kindly die for us. Okay, cliché much, but. Naruto took one look at their numbers and hissed. This was too many for a simple patrol. They'd been waiting for him. An ambush, then. But how? How had they known he was coming unless, run? He shouted, realizing what was about to happen. You can't handle this much. But, run. Naruto daren't look to see if they obeyed his command or not, he was too busy fighting for his life. The first to step within range of his Sharingan found himself on the receiving end of it to the face, and by then he'd no more time for thought. All the word was a blur of kunai and shuriken in fist and feet, he was at the center of the storm all, the eye of the hurricane. Sharingan tracked in impossible directions, he swung aside as kunai bearing an explosive note whistled past, peeling it off and slapping it onto the nearest shinobi, a swift shove, thrusting the living bomb into his fellows with a deafening bang, sending his assailants flying. In that instant, a bloodied palm slammed against the ground. Fuchiyus no Jutsu. Bahamut roared out of the subsequent smoke with a deafening snarl, his tail sweeping aside scores of enemy shinobi. One more, the Prince of Dragons towered over the battlefield, striking fear into all he faced. An irate snarl burst forth from his throat, followed by a geyser of flame as he realized where he had been summoned. Again. I've got a small army for you this time. Naruto snapped back, ducking as a wall of wind threatened to tear his head from its shoulders. Shut up and be satisfied already. I pray that they are worthy. That was all the time he needed for Mangekyo to activate. What followed was nothing short of a single-sided slaughter. Susanu's sinister swords and Bahamut's wrath made swift work of those who dared to come near them. Yet still they came, throwing their lives away. Jutsu were thrown left and right, blows exchanged, yet none came within arm's length of him. What was the point of this? Were they content to die without reaching him? He could just stand here, arms folded, and literally let the Susanoo end his enemies, all without breaking so much as a sweat. So why? Why were they attacking him so blindly? What the hell's going on here? What's going on? Kushina didn't understand what was happening. Was she dead? Was she dying? She didn't understand. One moment they were scrambling to get as far away from Naruto's battle as possible. The next. Something else happened. These shinobi were far beyond them, he'd said. Get away, he'd said. So they had, retreating to an acceptable distance from the fray, whilst their sensei made short work of the army arrayed against him. It shouldn't have happened. They'd been on their guard. They'd been prepared, ready for the possibility of an ambush, or even an attack. Damn it, they'd been ready. The Waki's scream was their only warning. Watch it. Before she knew what was happening, the ground was just gone. Earth rose all around them, swallowing them up before they could shout, spitting them out. Somewhere else. The sounds of Naruto's battle were but a distant thing, a backdrop to the horror unfolding before her very eyes. Something massive reared its head, a large snout poking out of the rainy soil. Then a body and a tail, its oily skin sliding through the muck like an eel. But this was no eel. This was a salamander. Well. A muffled voice murmured from atop the beast's head. Konoha's sending teenagers to kill me now. How disappointing. Her heart leapt into her throat when she saw that face. That mask. Oh no. No. This wasn't supposed to happen. Naruto had told them under no circumstance were they to ever face this man, that they needed to run if he ever cornered them. Ibiki went down first, clutching at his bloodied throat before he could even utter so much as a word. An elbow slid effortlessly into Nawaki's gut even as he called upon the Mokuton, his bloodline writhing uselessly at his feet as his control was severed, his body unconscious before he even hit the floor. That left her. Kushina. Hanzo turned toward her with a terrifying slowness, his kusarigama still dripping blood. She couldn't fight him. A child had a better chance of fighting him. Anyone but her. Let me out. The fox rumbled. I can destroy this fool and you know it. Kushina gulped, crawling backwards like a drunken crab in search of water. But there was no escape and she didn't know any earth techniques that would allow her to sink into the terrain. Let me out. Sorry, he rumbled. But I won't be sparing you. Someone wants you dead. Nothing personal. This is how the world works. In that instant, crippled with fear as she was, she had two options. Give into the fear and lose her life, or give into the beast inside her and live. Naruto had made her promise to never, ever rely upon Kyuubi's power. But it was either that or die. Let me out. Kushina gave in. I am it. Crimson chakra flooded her veins as the Biju cloak formed, three tails of pure hate sprouting from her back in an instant as she ceded restraint. Every fiber of her being stood on end, her canines gnashing together in silent agony as she struggled to keep the fourth tail from forming. Any further and she'd lose control completely. Even now, a small part of herself gloried in the release, the beast that the world feared so. Power. What glorious power. It was intoxicating, this chakra. She didn't know why she'd ever been afraid. Stop. Stop. You stupid fox. She hissed at it, clawing at the ground with her nails. Stop messing with my head. I'm not giving in to you. And why not? The demon rumbled, bemused. Naruto was quite compliant when his life was in danger. What? Naruto's not a. But that's where you're wrong, little girl. He was mine once upon a time, before this mess unfolded. Kushina yowled. Lying? You're lying. Am I now? Why don't you ask him? But first, oh? Hanzo blinked, intrigued, utterly unaware of the conflict taking place within. So you are interesting. Are you going to lose yourself, I wonder if. His words proved the weight to sever their argument, ending now in a muffled grunt as Kushina's fist crunched against his jaw, her clenched knuckles barreling into his face with enough force to create a hairline crack in his rebreather. Despite all her anger, she felt a trickle of pride. Genin or not, she'd actually managed to hurt him. Why was she falling? What had happened to her chakra? Why was everything so dark? What was going on? I'll give you credit for hitting me, Hanzo's voice murmured overhead, his scythe once more filling her vision. But I know a thing or two about suppressing their chakra. Pity, though. You made me lose my last one. Kushina. Say. Get the hell away from her. The last thing she saw was a blur of black. Get the hell away from her. Oh? Hanzo paused, his kusarigama coming just short of pricking Kushina's throat, stopped by a hand wrapped around his wrist. It's Naruto, I presume. You're late. I was expecting more of a challenge from your students. Naruto bristled as he beheld them lying there on the ground, their bodies beaten and broken. No. A quiet hiss of breath escaped his throat as the deadly edge drew blood. Not like this. They couldn't be. They just couldn't. If they were dead. No. Are you going to stand there all day, or are you going to attack me? Hanzo challenged. They won't live much longer if they don't receive medical attention. Oh shit. Don't lose it, partner. Adam. Christ. There he goes. That did it. He thought he had snapped before when he'd nearly failed to stop Kushina's kidnapping. He thought himself insane with anger when witnessed Tsunade's death in Wind Country. But this redefined anger. There was no red haze this time, no sensation of falling in the black, losing himself into the darkness. It was as simple as flicking a switch. One moment he stood there, soaked in the blood of a small arm of fools who dared to stall him, now slain. Next his mind simply ceased to be. He took in the prone, broken forms of his students of Kushin, and the Mangekyo flared to life in his eyes. There. Standing in the rain. He lost himself. Naruto screamed. Susanoo roared into existence around him, black bone and cold chakra writhing its angry tendrils in either direction. Larger it grew, assuming human shape and form, then larger still, its many arms spreading outwards like an ancient Asura, 6 limbs, 6 swords slashing at the ground in a thrashing frenzy. So great was its fury that the leader of the rain was actually forced to leap backward, seeking shelter atop the head of his mighty salamander, lest he be torn apart by the many blades. One thought stood at the forefront of his mind as he gazed upon the hellish creature that had engulfed the Black Death. What kind of Sharingan is that? Golden eyes glared out at Hanzo, a rictus of angry teeth parting in ghastly grimace as its master exhaled. 5 words were spoken in a series of sinister syllables that not only chilled Hanzo of the salamander to the bone, but left him quivering in very real fear for perhaps the first time in his career. I will fucking murder you. Oh. Big words for an upstart. The salamander crooked his fingers into a claw, beckoning anxiously. But I wonder, can you make it? Aokamikyaku. Naruto's shout emptied himself into the ground in a furious fire, a sinister swathe of flame to accompany his bold statement. The very same technique that had nearly made a corpse out of Yugaku only earned the briefest of blinks from Hanzo. That flame. His hands flicked into the appropriate seals to meet him head-on, inwardly balking at the sheer mass of fire roaring forwards across the ground. Suiton. Sujin Heki. Ibuse opened its mouth to aid its master and spat, expelling a jet of water to battle back the enveloping blaze. Too late he realized his mistake, the inferno had been little more than a distraction for his clones to get the brats to safety. An errant wind jutsu blew away the mist before Hanzo could hope to make use of it, and hell was revealed. Those damn eyes conveyed but 2 words onto his frightened mind. Black Death. Hanzo reared back, fearing the worst as Naruto started forwards at him. That was when the Susanoo began to shrink. Instead of growing larger as was often its wont, the massive creature of black chakra and Gon had the opposite effect, conforming itself to his every feature, forming a suit of ethereal armor over the already deadly Uchiha. But Uchiha or not, he was a mere man, and no man could hope to stand against Ibuse's poison once exhaled. Of that much he was certain. No man, Uchiha or otherwise, could defeat him. None. Rainton. John. Naruto opened his mouth, and Ibuse vanished in a torrent of light. It all happened so fast, one moment, Hanzo was standing astride his mighty mount, the next, Ibuse was gone, disintegrating out from under him as the terrible radiance slammed into the mighty beast. The poor salamander hadn't even had a chance to dispel itself, it was well and truly dead before it knew what had happened. Hanzo was lucky enough to leap away with his skin intact, his shoulder cloak smoldering away from his back as he flicked through the signs to counter. Futon. Tatapa. His wind jutsu never found its target because Naruto and his blast were already gone, the angry gale scoured yet another scar into the land of rain. The only warning Hanzo had was the crackle of the Uchiha's reemergence, a flicker of black light snarling into existence behind him. Oh dear. What was that black flash just now? What? With a sudden whisper, Naruto appeared behind Hanzo, his power-swollen limbs engulfed in the black light of Amaterasu. He was extremely close to the leader of rain, a powerful leg bent back and ready to snap forward at his skull. Hanzo saw him and reached around with his Kusurigama, but he already knew he wasn't going to be fast enough. Any hope of him outmaneuvering the Black Death was non-existent the moment that man had decided to unleash his Tromite upon the world. Even so, Hanzo deserved some credit for trying. Oten. Naruto spun around quickly, slamming his heel into Hanzo's body. With a surprised grunt, the pale-skinned shinobi went flying down the battlefield, a trail of dark blood following his broken body through the falling rain and into the muddy ground of the plains. A snarl caught in his throat and he found that his legs refused to move, his body powerless as his limp form slammed against the asphalt once gravity took hold of him, his skin skidding across the earth as the momentum continued to drag him over the short terrain. At last fate took mercy on him, his feet were suddenly freed from the ground as his back skidded into the rain-soaked soil, a modicum of control, returning to his body. He'd used the earth spear technique to harden his body at the last instant, it was the only thing that had saved his life. Even then, the Uchiha's roundhouse kick had fractured at least 3 ribs. Breathing hurts. It took a monumental effort just to stand. But stand Hanzo did, pulling himself woodenly to his feet despite the pain screaming in his side. Here was the man who had named the Sannin only hours before, a simple kick would not be enough to end him. Not bad, Uchiha. He murmured around his rebreather. You live up to your name. But you'll need more than cheap parlor tricks to beat me. The only responses he earned from the Uchiha was an inarticulate snarl of anger and loathing. Oh. Apparently the man cared more for his students than he thought. He'd have to ask that man about it. After he killed the Black Death, of course. One couldn't rush such things, and he was being paid a handsome sum of money to ensure that Konoha's upstarting shinobi met an untimely end. It was nothing personal, of course, a Megakure needed the money to function. He'd spared those other three purely on a whim, curious to see how the man would react. Thus far, he was not disappointed. Are you going to stand there all day, or are you going to attack me? Naruto raised his hand, made a clenching motion with a first and, well, a lot of things happened at once. The first realization Hanzo had that something was terribly, horribly wrong was when he was pulled, an invisible force violently yanking him forward off the ground, hauling back into the fray against his will. The next was that his right arm was suddenly gone, torn free from its socket by an impossibly long black blade, the latter extending and contracting in response to the Uchiha's chakra. A third was that he was flying past him, his remaining arm snapping like a matchstick as said Uchiha clobbered him into the ground. This close, Hanzo could clearly see the man's face, the angry purple eyes that leered down at him. The fifth and final thing, one that truly sealed Hanzo's fate, was the boy's eyes had changed yet again, his malevolent Mangekyo Sharingan, now more akin to an eerie rippling violet, one that every rank shinobi worth their salt knew of and feared. A sight that put the fear of the six-path sage into Hanzo right fierce and made him quiver like a green genin. Rinnegan. Rumors of the legendary had been abandoned since the dawn of the shinobi age, legends of the Rakuto Senin's eyes existing somewhere in the world. And now they are here. Engaging him was the last thing Hanzo wanted. No, what he needed was to get the hell away from this madman that was attacking him. He was outmatched in every conceivable way in the time it took him to think of a strategy, only brutalizing him even further still, extending a hand until his palm laid flat upon the prone man's back. 2 words were uttered, a single series of syllables that spelled doom for the leader of a Megakure. Shinra. Tensei. Ground. Earth and Hanzo became intimate in impossible ways, earth bursting before his form. Down he plunged, his body shooting through the soil like a human splinter, only to emerge once more as the almighty push cleared a path through the horrible dent in the earth. A path by which the poor man continued to suffer. Yelling incoherently, the enraged Uchiha dragged Hanzo's face down onto his rising knee before grabbing him two-handed by the arm and tossing him away overhead. The man's mind was left whirling, as was his field of vision. All the world was a rain-soaked blur, one he could no longer make sense of. What is happening? Naruto was suddenly there to greet him again, his boot slamming down on the man's chest with enough force to put an atom bomb to shame. Not that the latter had been invented yet, but someday, the world would look back and tremble when they saw the size of the crater that single stomp had created. His heel pressed down against Hanzo's chest, pinning him to the ground, denying him any chances of escape. No words were spoken, no final taunts uttered. He simply held Hanzo down with one foot, the man's chest caving underfoot. A single unspoken command was given. Susanoo. Naruto towered over him, that ghoulish skeleton flickering to life around him once more. It was larger now, larger than anything he had ever seen, its master ascending with, trapped within a line jewel atop its head. And it was still growing, its ever-expanding foot all but grinding the terrain to a pulp beneath its heel. And still the man did not die. Hanzo opened his mouth to plead for his life, too late, he realized there would be no mercy. Higher the black Susanoo towered, then higher still, its former piercing the weeping clouds themselves. It was massive, larger than a mountain, greater even than a. It drew its blade in one fluid motion, and it was then that he knew his death had come. There would be no split-second intervention from a third part to save him, no moment of respite from his aggressor. Oddly enough, he didn't feel fear. It had been a good fight, all things considered. His employer would doubtlessly be furious to learn that Konoha's Black Death would only continue to grow from this encounter. It was a good fight. Closing his eyes, Hanzo of the Salamander consented himself to death's frigid embrace. His last thought was thus. Black Death. Then the black blade descended and he knew no more. Tired. He was so. Goddamn. Tired. Naruto had never been more exhausted in his life. Awakening the Rinnegan was one thing, but calling upon the perfect Susanoo. His body was taxed to its very limits. He barely had enough strength to create a trio of shadow clones to carry his students' lumbering forms to safety. Even less, to check over them, tend their injuries, make certain they would survive. Never again, he avowed. Never again would he allow them to face such danger alone. They would learn from this experience, would live to see another day, another sunrise. Hanzo would not. Almost as an afterthought, Naruto approached the man's corpse. Hanzo's body was barely recognizable thanks to the Susanoo's pulverizing power, but enough of him remained that his scrolls were relatively intact in any case. He plucked the salamander contract from the shinobi's broken body, stowing it on his personage. It never hurts to pick your enemies clean. Speaking of which, it need proof of the man's death. Sword still in hand, he considered the man, appraising him. Then he slashed down, severing his head at the neck, decapitating him. Storing in, you killed him. He didn't even deign to turn, he'd sensed them on the fringes of the battle, but he'd been too consumed by bloodlust to notice. This close, it was impossible not to recognize their Chakrawat. Little they had his untrained children, yet his heart still skipped a beat nevertheless as he drew nearer. It was them. He'd been so focused on finishing Hanzo with all of his power that he hadn't even paused to consider the possibility that his perfect Susanoo, massive as it was, could attract unwanted attention. Yeah, I killed him. He spoke, rising from his crotch. What of it? Nothing. A girl's voice stammered out, stuttering in her fear. It's just. That thing was huge. It was. Naruto conceded, peering at the break he'd made in the clouds. This country needed something big to put an end to her tears. Indeed, for the first time in nearly a century, it was no longer raining. The sky was blue and clear overhead, the sun poking its head fearfully between the breaks almost for fear of being punished. Beautiful, huh? Naruto chuckled. You say that like you mean it. Another voice challenged his words. I do. So? Are those your students? Naruto's gaze drifted to Kushina, Ibiki, and Iwaki. Yes. He supplied quietly, still refusing to look at them. They'll be just fine. They're strong. For a long moment nothing was said. Finally, the girl spoke again. Who are you, mister? The name's Uchiha Naruto. He felt nearly 1,000 years old as he turned and laid eyes upon Nagato, Yahiko, and Konan when he saw their young faces. They were just as he'd imagined they would be. Those are some mighty fine eyes you got there, kid. Just like mine. To his credit, the Redeed actually held up under his stare for a moment before his courage faltered, and he ducked behind his companion's ladder, eyeing him up and with an expression eerily akin to awe. Or perhaps fear. But these three had nothing to fear. Not from him. Nagato. Yahiko. Konan. They were here. Naruto couldn't help it, he laughed, it was a soft throaty sound. This changed everything. The strength left his legs then, he played it off by crouching down before them. You kids have names? He asked, benignly, despite already knowing. They supplied them. No parents, huh? Even hearing their tale for a second time, he still felt sorry for them. If it makes you feel any better, I never knew my folks, either. But you know ninjutsu. Yahiko pointed out. Yeah, because I worked my ass off to learn it. Can you teach us? Boy now, that's a bit of a tall order there. Why do you want to learn ninjutsu? The boy immediately colored, but his bluster was swift to return. I wanted to make this land stop crying. That's already been done. Naruto pointed out. Then. Because I don't want to lose anyone else. Naruto grinned. Good answer, kid. There was a silence after that, the three orphans unsure of what to say to this strange man. You hungry? He dug a hand into pouch, retrieving the rations he'd been saving for this very occasion. I've got the suo. They were all but snatched out of his hands by Yahiko and Konan, with Nagato only slightly more reluctant to take his offered share of the food. I'll take that as a yes. Why are your eyes like Nagato's? Konan asked as she ate, peering at him. Smart girl, leaving it to her to put two and two together. They're the same, but you're not in Uzumaki, are you? Nope, but she is. Naruto pointed toward Kushina's slumbering form. Maybe she's your long-lost cousin or something. Nagato jerked as though he'd been hit by a lightning bolt. This young woman was related to him by blood. He flushed at the thought. Konan wasn't so easily satisfied. You didn't answer my question. Well, he and I are the same in a way. Naruto smiled softly. These eyes help me protect those precious to me. Isn't that right, Nagato? You have someone you want to protect, don't you? The boy nodded quietly, his eyes straying towards his friends once more. It really warmed the heart. So, are you going to teach us or not? Persistent kid, this Yahiko. Now, all in good time. Naruto soothed as they finished off his rations. I plan on heading back once these three have recovered and I've found my allies. Their faces fell. Hey. I wasn't finished. He barked out, causing them to start. So, kids. Still smiling, he extended a hand to the three orphans. How would you like to become shinobi? The words were barely out of his mouth before they shouted him down. Yes. Minato. Curiosity momentarily overtook his better judgment. He detached himself from the wall and spoke. Hey. At the sight of him the blonde seemed to fold in on himself. Those blue eyes became hard, the normally soft and smiling face almost distant in comparison. In a couple of years this man would be the fourth Hokage. But right here, right now, he was merely a young man, only a few years younger than him. And he was being an ass. Now, Naruto had always respected his father, although he'd never really known him. Never had he seen him on a bad day or at his worst. Not as he was now. Here, in this moment, the young Namikaze did not remind him of his father. At all. Uchiha-san. There was a coldness to his tone, it worried Naruto. What are you doing out this late? Don't you have enough pet projects? The teenager grumbled. You've already got Kushina under your thumb, then you brought those orphans back from AIM. Now you've suddenly taken an interest in me? Well now, no need to get so angry. He raised his hands, placating the younger boy. I was just curious. You were trying to steal my jutsu, you mean? Boy now, I know for a fact that you've got nothing worth stealing. Naruto scowled, drawing a growl from the young man. Yet. But given some time. Hello? The boy muttered something unintelligible. Naruto frowned. Say again. I said. Oof. Air rushed out of him in a surprised lunge, his father's fist sheathing itself in his stomach. He'd never seen it coming. One moment the boy was standing across from him, next his body flickered and an arm was quite painfully sheathed up to the elbow in his gut. Stay away from Kushina. Naruto felt the hackles on the back of his neck begin to rise. The leash he'd kept on his self-control, already frayed, chose that instant to snap. The sudden realization that he was sick of being talked to like this brought a wave of rage to his mind with the ferocity of a great and dark tempest. Sick. Of. Hi. Shit. Boy. Minato froze as a hand of black chakra and bone materialized from nowhere, its bleak fingers lashing out to crunch against his ribsage. Naruto slammed the teenager up against a wall with such force that he actually felt the boy's collarbone crack. For the first time, an expression of very real fear cracked across the blonde's visage at the sight of those swirling Tomo, bright and red and so very angry. Just like that their positions were reversed, the attacker had become the attacked. So you wanna play, huh? He rumbled. Just like that, Minato was free, the ghostly appendage vanishing into thin air. Alright, Minato. Let's play. Thank you so much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoy it. If you want the next part of this video, turn on that bell notification. Like, subscribe and comment down below. And also check out the others' videos I have created and enjoyed it. See you guys next video. Till that, take care.